Rezart Beka, by the way, welcome. First time we are organizing this activity outside. Is it nice, do you think? Did you like it this way? Maybe. And I think throughout the spring, we can organize this way, and if you liked it. We should. This is first time, I think. It's good, isn't it? You liked it, huh? Yeah, compared inside, I guess, acoustics, this one is better, huh? Yeah, no doubt. The wind. Yeah, the wind, you're right. It's better maybe. Rezart Beka is currently a Ph.D. student in Arabic and Islamic Studies at Georgetown University. He obtained his first MA in International Studies of Religions and Cultures from Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome, Italy in 2011, and his second MA in study of contemporary Muslim thought and societies at Faculty of Islamic Studies. Kötü oluyor değil mi? Şş. Ne yapacağız? Ha, şöyle. Okay. Just we are trying at the same time. And so his second MA is coming from Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University, Doha, Qatar in 2016. He authored 3 books. He's a very prolific writer, it seems. So the floor is yours. Okay. 30 minutes and then...
So, is it here? Do you hear me? Okay. So, first of all, I wanted to thank the organizer for inviting me in this talk and for all of you coming, especially Tariq and everybody else of the organization. So, my talk will be on Fiqh al-waqi, jurisprudence of reality, in the Saudi Sahwa discourse. All right? Normally in the popular, if it is too much, tell me. Like here? Okay. Okay. Let me see. Okay. I don't think they hear me. If you don't hear me, tell me, because I cannot hear myself. You don't hear me, right? Yeah. Wait. I think up. Tamam? Okay. So, I'm not leaning, I just... Okay. Alright. Because if there is not this, you'll not be able to hear me. However, I was saying that normally in the popular Western imagination, Saudi Arabia is depicted as a traditional religious conservative society with a religious class that is averse to any form of change or reform. Scholars who have studied Saudi Arabia has been prompt to criticize this misconception and to highlight the fact that the Saudi religious field has a dynamicity and that Saudi religious sphere has been affected by a lot of trends who has been proposing reforms or change in the religious field, in the cultural field, also in political field for that matter. One of the trends that has been very influential and that has been also part of a large debate within the Saudi social society has been the Saudi Sahwa. Now, in a while I will explain what the Saudi Sahwa is, but for the moment I will say that the Saudi Sahwa proposed the so-called to establish Fiqh al-waqi, the jurisprudence of reality or a reality-based jurisprudence, as a conceptual framework to restore the relevance of Sharia for modern times. Today, I will not just explain what the Saudi Sahwa is, but I will try to trace the intra-Salafi debates on Fiqh al-waqi as a notion, jurisprudence of reality, and I will try to unravel the various discursive strategies used by the non-Sahwi Salafi scholars, so Salafi scholars of non-Sahwi affiliations, on Fiqh al-waqi. I'll try to unravel the discursive strategies used by the Salafi scholars to problematize the Sahwi conceptualization of reality and to tame its revolutionary elements by bringing them in line with the predominant Salafi religious methodologies, manhaj. It is my contention that the debates on Fiqh al-waqi were enabled and rendered intelligible in the first place by the modern condition, the new subjectivities, and the novel social configuration created by the Saudi Western-style modernization process. This process constitutes the field against which each actor involved in the debate tries to construct its position vis-à-vis Fiqh al-waqi. Also, another point that I would like to make today is that unlike the common understanding, the non-Sahwi Salafi scholars or non-Sahwi Salafi criticism of fiqh al-waqi, jurisprudence of reality, has been multifaceted and not limited only to literalist considerations, right, or political positions. Rather, in their analysis, Salafi scholars have often offered a more nuanced conceptualization of al-waqi than the sometimes uncritical articulation of it by the Sahwis themselves. So those who have responded to fiqh al-waqi, they haven't just followed some literalist consideration in replying to it, but they have used reasoned criticism, if we can say that, against the Saudi Sahwa conceptualization of al-waqi. Now, at this point is a brief look into the context and the peculiarities of Saudi Sahwa movement are necessary in order for us to better situate and evaluate the intra-Salafi debates on fiqh al-waqi. Now, the intellectual predecessors of the Sahwis were the Muslim Brotherhood scholars who in the 50s and the 60s were welcomed in the kingdom to contribute to the nascent field of education and help in the construction of a pan-Islamist discourse as a counter-response to Nasser's pan-Arabist socialism. Simultaneously with the pan-Islamist discourse, the Saudi kingdom promoted a modernization discourse based on the notion of tanmiyah, development, and injazat, achievements, represented by various modernist and leftist Saudi intellectuals who became the spokesman for the kingdom's development and modernization. By the 70s, the Saudi modernists became the backbone of the new Saudi bureaucratic state machine and occupied the key administrative positions in the government as well as dominated the cultural sphere. They constituted an entire new social field, that of the muthaqafun, that was added to the already existing political and religious field of Saudi Arabia. In the 70s, the social configuration of Saudi society was characterized by what Stéphane Lacroix calls the sectorization of social life, where all sectors of societies, like the religious, the intellectual sector, the religious and intellectual sectors, maintain a vertical relation with the political authority and reduce to maximum any horizontal intersectorial interference or interaction between each other. In this way, reformist mobilization within one sector of society finds it difficult to spread to other social fields. The Sahwis themselves emerged in Saudi Arabia in the 80s. They represented an amalgam of Wahhabi religious doctrines with Muslim Brotherhood socio-political activism. Historically, their emergence were enabled by the economic crisis of the 70s, end of the 70s, due to a drop in oil revenue, the Iranian Revolution, and the rise of global Islamism, as well as the disruption and the rapid deterioration of the Saudi social life caused by the modernization process. Its main advocates were young Saudi scholars and intellectuals who presented themselves as haraka ilmiya, islahiyya, sunniya, salafiyya, siyasiyya. So a Sunni reformist, scientific, and political movement. And its most vocal representatives were young Saudi scholars like Safar Hawali, Salman al-Auda, and Nasir Umar. Two of them, the first two, are currently imprisoned in Saudi Arabia for activist purposes and for political reasons also, as well as religious. They were called the so-called religious reformist leadership, right? These three scholars. Now, the Sahwis were strongly opposed to the sectorization of social life and identified the problem of Saudi society in the predominance of the phenomenon of irja, postponement. This is a theological concept, but they use it in a specific, for a specific reason and a specific context. In the Sahwi context, irja means a worldview that separates faith from outward actions. For the Sahwis, irja was the consequence of modernist conspiracy to promote the separation of faith from socio-political engagement and to establish in this way the heresy of secularism and modernism in the Saudi kingdom. To this, Sahwis juxtaposed the principle of unity of sovereignty, Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, as a contrast to the separation of faith from works. in which faith and outward works are conceived as intrinsically connected. Around the same time, the Sahwis criticized the Wahhabi establishment for being oblivious to the contemporary socio-political realities and for being preoccupied only with frivolous, minute legal details of tahara and ibadah, purity and worship. Their negligence of fiqh al-waqi was seen by Sahwis as the main reason for the weakening of ulama's role in society and the proliferation of secularist conspiracies against Islam. Also, the traditional ulama were criticized for so-called al-mana fikriyya, intellectual secularism. That means for unconsciously appropriating elements of irja, separation from faith and works, in their religious methodology. And for being just ulama nas and not ulama al-waqi'ah, so scholars of the texts and not scholars of reality. In order to respond to the above-mentioned perceived challenges, the Sahwi engaged throughout the 80s and the 90s, beginning of 90s, in an intensive public campaign against the Saudi modernists, and in a low-intensity war with the religious establishment itself. In a short period, they created their own intellectuals and ulama and dominated the Saudi public sphere. Sahwa constituted a multi-sectorial mobilization that undermined the very essence of the social configuration of Saudi society of that time by challenging liberals' monopoly over state affairs and that of the religious establishment over the religious domain. In the 90s, the Sahwi movement colluded with the political field, not only with the cultural and religious, but also with political field, by opposing the welcoming of US troops in the Holy Land and by publicly proposing a series of political and economic reforms. The movement was cracked down by the state in 1994, where the leaders of the movement were imprisoned without formal charges in order to be liberated in 1998 under the specific circumstances and conditions. Now, I will take as a case study the treatise, the famous treatise of Nasir al-Umar, one of the representatives of Sahwa at the time, called Fiqh al-Waqi' Muqawimatuhu wa Atharuhu wa Masadiruhu, the jurisprudence of reality, foundation, influences and source. This treatise is dedicated to the ulama. It has been published in 1992 at the peak of Sahwa activities and right 2 years before their being imprisoned. And the treatise is dedicated to the ulama and tulab al-ilm, students of knowledge, and is an attempt to identify the plights that affect the religious field in Saudi Arabia and restore its relevance for society. And is situated, Nasir Umar situated the treatise within a discourse of crisis, in which the present condition of Muslim Ummah is presented as that of disruption, decline, backwardness, and powerlessness. This condition is attributed in the treatise to the abandonment of the guidance of the Quran and Sunnah to integrate fiqh al-waqi' in the religious discourse, and to the restriction of Sharia's application in society as a consequence of the spread of modernity in Saudi Arabia and the introduction of positive laws, qawanin al-wada', in the kingdom. Within a conspirative framework that they inherited from the Muslim Brotherhood writings, mostly, Al-Umar presents Saudi society as victim of the secularist plot to undermine the religious foundation of the society and establish the heresy of modernism. Only the integration of fiqh al-waqi', jurisprudence of reality, in the religious discourse is presented as capable of understanding and unmasking the secularist conspiracy against the religion and traditions in Saudi Kingdom and restore the role of Islam and ulama in society. This is why Al-Umar defines fiqh al-waqi' in political terms as a science making it possible to understand current situations, notably the factors acting on societies, the forces dominating states, the ideas designed to undermine faith, and the legitimate means of protecting the ummah and making it advance now and in the future. Umar presents fiqh al-waqi' as one of the three pillars on which every fatwa is based. The first is fiqh al-usul, or understanding the principles of jurisprudence of the principles. The second is fiqh al-furu', substantive law or fiqh per se. And the third is fiqh al-waqi', jurisprudence of reality. Unlike the ulum al-dunyawiyya, the worldly sciences, fiqh al-waqi for Nasir Omar is a Shariatic science, is not a dunyawi ilm, and is equipped with the necessary principles and components from which it emerges and can proceed. Therefore, for him, fiqh al-waqi is a real scientific knowledge, is a ilm, and is not fun, is not a subjective art, and constitutes an individual obligation, a fard ayn, for every scholar and student of knowledge. Omar's grounds the legitimacy of fiqh al-waqi in the Quranic objective of exposing to the believers the way of mujrimun, the way the sinners or the criminals, I don't know, of the kuffar, acts in society. For Umar, one of the main objectives of Quran is to expose to Muslims how the disbelievers work against them, to make their way clear to them. Therefore, this requires a detailed knowledge of the methodologies used by the sinners or by mujrimun and how they use them to make plots against Islam. Therefore, hence there is a need for fiqh al-waqi'. Umar in his treatise says that the establishment of fiqh al-waqi' requires an erudition from the ulama and the ability to navigate a vast array of sources, from the Islamic ones to the most contemporary ones. He strongly argues that in order to acquire a correct understanding and perception of reality and to establish the Sharia ruling on that matter, ulama should have an interdisciplinary training and be in touch with works on political science, diplomacy, political economy, international relations, media, history, etc. They must become an important influencing factor in society by developing a positive interaction with reality, as he calls it, and by immersing themselves in everyday life. Because, as he says, and I quote, "It is no exaggeration if I say, indeed, whoever stops following the news or the events for 6 months needs a long period before being able to get back into touch with reality." Now, in the particular Saudi Sahwi context, this means that unlike political quietism of the Wahhabi establishment, fiqh al-waqi' requires from Muslim scholars to lead the call for socio-political reform and change. In Omar's view, one of the characteristics of fiqh al-waqi' is not that fiqh al-waqi' is just to understand politics, media, social science, or other disciplines that explain the reality, but fiqh al-waqi' has a Shariatic grounding, the so-called ta'sil al-shari'i, which means that it is not limited only in materialistic consideration or positivistic methods, but is grounded on Shariatic principles. Therefore, it has a holistic understanding of the social contingent realities, and only in this way the true nature of reality can be established. In this way, by doing this, by saying that the knowledge of reality that we acquire from modern contemporary sciences is not valid if it is not put under the principles of Sharia, Nasir Umar tries to take the monopoly of understanding reality from the modernists, for the muthaqafun field, and bring it back to the religious field to the Sahwis themselves, who, based on the principle of Sharia and the understanding of contemporary ulum, dunyawi ulum, they are able to bring a real normative understanding of social contingent realities. Now, this is pretty much what the fiqh al-waqi' per se was, and what is the context in which it emerged, and what is the challenge that they replied. Normally, there are some studies on fiqh al-waqi' or the Sahwis. There are many studies on fiqh al-waqi' per se. There is a kind of absence in literature, but there is a complete absence of how did the Wahhabi establishment or the other Salafi trends reply to the Sahwi discourse. And one of the aim, and the last part of my talk, is exactly to explain what are the discursive strategies that the non-Sahwi Salafi scholars used in order to reply to this challenge of fiqh al-waqi' or the integration of fiqh al-waqi' in religious sciences. Now, The Salafi response have been multifaceted, and they have used different strategies. One of them has been to discredit the origin and the legitimacy of the notion of fiqh al-waqi per se. So in word-by-word refutation of the treatise of Nasir Umar, a Salafi scholar, Saud al-Uqayli, constructs the genealogy of fiqh al-waqi, in which he argues that the notion of fiqh al-waqi is taken from the Western literary and political realism, the so-called waqa'iyya realism. And he argues that the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood appropriated realism from the Arab secularist literary and political circles and passed it down to the Sahwis. Such a genealogy of fiqh al-waqi serves a double purpose. From one hand, it relegates fiqh al-waqi to literary modernism, that in the Saudi context, it is represented by the secularist and modernist intellectuals. And from the other hand, it traces its religious origin back to the Muslim Brotherhood, discrediting in this way Saudi religious credentials in front of Wahhabi Salafi audience. Whereas Salih Abdul Aziz al-Sheikh, another senior Salafi scholar, traced the origin of notion of fiqh al-waqi in Sayyid Qutb's commentary of the Surah Yusuf, verse 55, in which Prophet Yusuf asked the king to be appointed as the wazir of the country. In that particular passage on the shadow of the Quran, Sayyid Qutb speaks about so-called fiqh al-awraq, jurisprudence of the text, or the, and fiqh al-haraka, the jurisprudence of movement. Now, fiqh al-haraka, the main element of fiqh al-haraka is fiqh al-waqi in the Quds commentary, and consists in the establishment of an ideal Islamic society, first, where people are willing to submit to God's sovereignty, and then, only then, the fiqh and the ulum ad-diniyya can be applied. So first, there is a need to establish justice and a kind of society where people will be happy to be ruled by Sharia, and then all the fiqh and the ahkam al-fiqhiyya or shara'iyya will be applied. Now, by tracing the origin of fiqh al-waqi to Sayyid Qutb's commentary, al-Sheikh achieves two things. First of all, again, he brings back fiqh al-waqi to Muslim Brotherhood that is not seen favorably in the Saudi society. And second, he tries to argue that this kind of concept undermines the priority in Islam. So first, they say about establishing an Islamic state, and then they say about applying Sharia. And that's the problem with Sahwis. They want to do an Islamic state and then to apply Sharia there, but the hierarchy should be, we first establish the Sharia in the hearts of people, Tasfiyah wa Tarbiyah of Albanian and other scholars, and then the Islamic state will be a fruit of consequence of that, grounding the right aqidah and the right fiqh. So that was the first strategy. The second one is that they have questioned the epistemological validity of fiqh al-waqi sources. Now, Nasir Umar have talked about that some of the main sources of fiqh al-waqi are the political science, diplomacy, history, and all the sciences, media, and I don't know, other disciplines. Now, Salafi scholars have tried to question the epistemological validity of these sources, and by questioning them, questioning fiqh al-waqi per se. For example, again, Salih Abdul Aziz al-Sheikh says that sources like politics, media are dhanniya, equivocal. They are not qat'iyya, they cannot bring certainty. And therefore they lack the epistemological certainty, objectivity, or boundaries to be considered ilm, sciences. As he explained, the knowledge of political reality is ilm bil khabar, it's just information through news, and it's not fiqh, it's not understanding reality per se. Whereas Salih al-Fawzan, another senior Wahhabi scholar, Salafi scholar, says that contemporary knowledge of political reality should be considered a tasawwur al-waqi'a, just a kind of imagination of or a perception of what reality is, but not fiqh al-waqi'a, not understanding what reality is. Therefore, another famous Salafi scholar, Salih al-Uthaymin, says that disciplines like politics and media are based on estimation, speculation, personal subjectivity. Therefore, in reality, fiqh al-waqi is just following your own hawa, passions, right? Whereas Rabia Madkhali, another senior scholar of a specific trend in Salafi, Saudi Salafism, questioned the neutrality of the sources themselves. And he says that media, politics, history that comes from the West are made and constructed by non-Muslims who has a vested interest in misguiding Muslims and misleading them, especially in connection with Saudi society. Therefore, all the Sahwis that have followed suit to this conceptual framework that come from this media and politics, they are just being trapped in the trap that they have set for them, the non-Muslim have set for them. Another leader of a Salafi trend, Nasruddin al-Albani, the Albanian scholar, says that he questioned the ability to actually establish a fiqh al-waqi as it is presented by the Sahwis. He says that the Sahwis require for people to be erudite and interdisciplinary, and they require from one scholar to be knowledgeable in so many fields, and this is just an utopian idea, and that cannot work out in reality. He in one of the book, in one of his treatises called Su'al wa Jawab an Fiqh al-Waqi', he says, Sahwi discourse obliged scholars of book and sunnah, kitab al-sunnah, to be knowledgeable also in economic, social science, politics, military regime, methods of usage of modern weapons, etc., right? I don't think that exists any rational person who thinks that a single person can gather in himself all these various sciences. Then, I don't know how much time I have. Okay. Then a third discursive strategy used by the non-Sahwi scholars to undermine the Saudi conception of fiqh al-waqi' has been that of questioning the unitary approach to reality. As I said before, Sahwa came as a response to the fragmentarization of social life in Saudi society, where modernists became the leaders of the so-called cultural sphere, right? State establishment and all this bureaucracy and etc. And the ulama were the leaders of spiritual and akhlaq and morals and ethics, etc. And the Sahwis, through Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, the unity of sovereignty, and through fiqh al-waqi', try to argue that reality in Islam is integrative approach, so there is a Tawheed who integrates all dimensions in one. And irja as a cultural phenomenon is the main problem of Saudi society. We have to regain and restore the unity that Tawheedic approach brings us. Now, Salafi scholars try to argue that in reality, fiqh al-waqi' of the Sahwis falls in the same problem that they are trying to heal. They are disrupting society by arguing that by dividing scholars of ulama al-nas and ulama al-waqi', scholars of text and scholars of reality. For example, Rabia Madkhali, in one of the books in which he deals with many Sahwis and also with fiqh al-waqi', argues that this division of ulama al-nas, scholar of the text, and scholar of reality, is very similar to the antinomian contracts of the Sufis between haqiqah, sharia, and haqiqah, where the outward dimensions, the scriptures, the fiqh, is left to some scriptural ulama, whereas the reality, al-haqiqah, al-waqi', is for the Sufi sheikhs or for the inward ulamas, that in the case of Sahwis are the Sahwi ulama, who not only know the text, but they know also the reality behind them and how to apply them in society. In this way, they are presenting fiqh al-waqi' scholars as higher and more elevated than the so-called textual scholars. Another Athari Salafi scholar, Ali al-Halabi, the student of Nasruddin Albani, he agrees with Madkhali and portrays fiqh al-waqi' approach as so-called tasawwuf al-asri, the contemporary Sufism, right? And he contends that this antinomian tendency parallels also another division, and is the division of the modernist Western terminology of progressive versus reactionary, where where progressive are the the Sahwa scholars, who know the modern world, who know the sciences, and who apply them correctly, and the reactionary are the Wahhabi elite, the establishment, who are just, isolated only on the textual considerations. So in this way, through this strategy, they are trying to tell to the Sahwis that in reality, you are not bringing an integrative approach to Islam, but you are actually making another division, another fragmentarization. Therefore, you cannot be the solution for that thing. And the fourth and the last one is questioning the obligatoriness, if I can say this, or the religious status of fiqh al-waqi'. This has been very common and the main approach. What does it mean? It means that for Sahwis, fiqh al-waqi' is fard ayn, is an obligation for every scholar and student of knowledge. Salafi scholars, therefore Salafi scholars lack this fiqh al-waqi', therefore they have a problem, which the Sahwi scholars have come to remedy or to restore. Non-Sahwi Salafi scholars have tried to reply to this by downgrading the religious status of fiqh al-waqi' from fard ayn to fard kifaya, from individual obligation to communal obligation. For example, again, Nasruddin Albani in his book Su'al wal Jawab an Fiqh al-Waqi', he accepts Fiqh al-Waqi'. He says it is a legitimate ilm, and scholars should know that, right? And according to their own specifics and according to their own legal issues that come in front of them. And he gives definitions of fiqh al-waqi' and how important it is in Islam, etc. But he says that is not an individual obligation, it's not a fard ayn, it's a fard kifaya, it's a communal obligation. Like many other communal obligations, like fiqh al-lugha, fiqh al-khilaf, jurisprudence of disagreements, of all these knowledges are fard kifaya. If some people do that, then the obligation falls on the rest of society. Only kitab wa sunnah, fiqh al-kitab wa sunnah, is an obligation, individual obligation for each scholar. Therefore, the transformation of fiqh al-waqi' by the Sahwis as a manhaj, the main manhaj for Islamic dawah, is seen by Albani as a manifest error and a great mistake. For him, the fulfillment of fiqh al-waqi' belongs to what? To the rulers and to the people who have the power to order and execute. So he delegates that to actually the political sphere or to the state bureaucratic machine field, right? So he is actually delegated it to the modernists because they were having it as a field. On the same line, Salih al-Uthaymin says that fiqh al-waqi' and fiqh al-din are mutually exclusive. They are not the same. For him, the preoccupation of fiqh al-waqi' prevents Muslims from acquiring fiqh al-din, understanding in religion. Because, and I quote, for him the heart is a vessel that if filled with something prevents the presence of something else. The end of quote. In his opinion, Muslims are obliged individually to acquire the knowledge of only two things. Fiqh al-nafs, which is the acquiring of a right doctrine, aqidah, and fiqh al-badan, the jurisprudence of the body, let's say like this, that consists in achieving the right understanding of halal and haram, like the fiqh. Whatever lies outside this communal, from these individual duties is not an obligation on people, is not an obligation on scholars. Now, there is a qaida in Islam that says that you cannot oblige people to acquire kifaya knowledge if that kifaya knowledge has already been fulfilled, which means that you are not obliged to make people obliged to acquire knowledge that is outside the individual obligation that they have. Therefore, the Sahwis are doing exactly this, are putting overburden on scholars or students of knowledge or even Muslims to acquire knowledge that they are not obliged. According to the Salafi scholars, this so-called fiqh al-waqi' for them is already been fulfilled as a fard by the state authorities, by the think tanks of the, political, I don't know, and by all the cultural field which deals with that, explaining events, currents, politics, strategies, etc. Therefore, we as scholars do not need to actually acquire that because we can just refer that to something else. So, in this context, and this is one of the main strategies that they have used against Sahwis, in this context, I would like to argue that, just a second, that all this debate on fiqh al-waqi' in reality reflects the compartmentalization of reality, of social reality in Saudi Arabia, and the sectorization of social space, where the religious and political field inhabit and are responsible for different and separate social duties. Here we are confronted with two different articulations of religion in Saudi Arabia. On one side are the Sahwis, who based on the framework of Tawheed al-Hakimiyya, unity of sovereignty, try to present an integrative view of reality and conceptualize fiqh al-waqi' as a constitutive element and inherent part of what is traditionally known as fiqh ad-din. So they see it, fiqh al-waqi' as the core of fiqh ad-din and not as mutually exclusive with fiqh ad-din. Therefore, the Sahwis sees this as an individual duty for scholars because acquiring fiqh al-waqi' means acquiring fiqh ad-din. On the other side are the traditional non-Sahwi Salafi trends or the Wahhabi establishment, who in accordance with the sectorization of social life, social field, they reify religion and confine it to a specific social space or intellectual real, and conceptualize fiqh al-waqi' as external to what is properly considered religion, deen. Therefore, is a communal duty. And with like the last paragraph, I would like to conclude that the emergence of Sahwa and the entire discourse that I just explained is inextricably connected with modernity and the new social political realities that it created in Saudi Arabia. The Sahwi themselves was a product of the tensions and social disruptions created by the rapid modernization of the Saudi kingdom and of the emergence of entire new social fields and spaces inhabited and claimed by new social actors. The heated intra-Salafi debates on the epistemological and religious validity of the new media technologies or of the contemporary sources like history, politics, that have characterized the debate on fiqh al-waqi' is unintelligible outside the modernization process and the new conditions that it created in Saudi society. The same is true of contrasting views between Sahwis and the other Salafi trends on the nature of reality, Islamic politics, and its role in Islamic reform. The debate on fiqh al-waqi' is an indicator of the struggle of the various contemporary Salafi groups to articulate a credible and relevant religious discourse within the new conditions and sensibilities enabled by the modernization process in Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much.
I will ask first question.
Yes.